What happened to those who had attended a botched wedding? My aunt had a wedding during a tropical storm. Power went out in the church during the ceremony, so it had to be completed in the dark with phone lights. Then at the reception, which was held in a semi-outdoor space, had generators to try to get some power up, but it was extremely loud so you couldn't hear the music or people. Then it rained so hard that water was seeping from the walls, ceilings, which flooded a good portion of the reception floor. Final piece. The maid of honor got so drunk she threw up right at the entrance of the venue, so everyone had to pass by it to enter, leave. Friend's wedding. A bunch of people got food poisoning at the rehearsal dinner, including the groom. He spent the night at the getting fluids and medication to stop puking. This was an awesome high-end wedding and he almost canceled. He was a pale green color and basically sipped Gatorade all day and got through it. He married his HS sweetheart and they have been married 30+ years. My family was invited to what we thought was an engagement party. My aunt had reserved a room at a local restaurant for about 50 people. Turns out it was my cousin's wedding. So no one brought a gift or dressed up at all. Bride is in a wedding dress and groom is wearing jeans. We ordered food and drinks. The officiant does his thing while waiters are bringing in drinks and appetizers. Finally over and we get to eat. But when the officiant asked for the marriage license so they can all sign it, my cousin and his new wife just stared at him confused. They didn't know they had to get one. Thought just having a wedding was enough. They were in their late 20s. So wedding, but no marriage. They never did, officially, get married, and he ran off a few years later to another state to be with some girl he met online. I was a bridesmaid in my brother's wedding. Day of the wedding we are all getting ready as you normally would. I'm in the bridal suite area. Everything is going fantastically. The church is filled to capacity with guests. We all walk down the aisle and take our places. Bridesmaids and groomsmen alike. My soon-to-be Sil is walking down the aisle on her father's arm. My brother is nowhere in sight. There is a long, awkward pause as my Sil is standing in front of a packed church. And we are all just looking at each other. Everyone is assuming the worst, that my brother has skipped out at the altar and left her. I'm whispering to the best man, "Where is he?" He says, "IDK." My mom is nearly having a heart attack. My dad finally gets up, goes to the room where my bro was supposed to be waiting, and comes out with my brother. My brother says, "Where's the minister? I was waiting on him." My bro hadn't left at all. The minister was a no-show. He was supposed to be waiting with my bro and walk out with him, or tell him when it was time to walk out, while groomsmen were lining up to escort bridesmaids down the aisle. Because no one had checked in on my bro after getting ready, no one knew the minister wasn't there. At this point, we are all standing in a group at the front of the church. The majority of the church guests still don't know what is going on. Just that my bro had to be summoned. And there are angry looks all around. My dad realizes he needs to let them in on what's going on. So he announces to the guests, "We can't find the pastor. Is anyone here licensed?" Of course no one is. The bride's father calls the minister on his cell phone on speaker so the whole church can hear the conversation. "Hi Pastor Denny. Where are you? Did you forget what today was?" "Yes, Denny. The wedding. The wedding is right now. We are all waiting on you at the church." "Okay, we'll just wait here then." Turns out the pastor was playing golf and had put the wedding date down as the following weekend in his planner. I then ask my soon-to-be Sil if she wants us to walk back down the aisle and come back in or what. She says at this point, "Forget it, we are all here," so we just stand around and wait for Pastor Denny and try to make jokes with the wedding guests, but it's pretty awkward as no one really knows what to do. After about 15 minutes, Pastor Denny comes running into the church in his golf clothes polo. shirt, funny shorts, etc. apologizes and goes immediately into the vows. My poor Sil was furious that day. First thinking my bro had ditched her at the altar, then at the fact that the minister had ditched them. Lol. She laughs about it now, but it was a tense ceremony. Went to the wedding of one of my husband's close friends and everything was going wonderful until about 3 hours in, when the bride's grandma becomes unresponsive. We were sitting right next to that table when she falls to the floor not breathing. Our other friend, an EMT, ended up performing CPR on her until the paramedics came. He said he felt her ribs cracking under his hands. The wedding promptly ended as the bride and groom go to the hospital with grandma. She passed away in the hospital that night after an emergency surgery. I attended an outdoor wedding in December. All the guests assumed there would be shelter, heating, but nope, nothing was provided. All us guests were freezing cold. Some got drunk as fast as they could and others kept asking the staff for cups of tea. Not to drink but to hold the warm cups. It was awful. A coworker was to one of my closest friends' wedding, and there were strict food regulations, no nuts. Present were a few of individuals present who were really allergic, including the maid of honor. The venue served something with nuts, and the maid of honor became anaphylactic. The EpiPen did not work, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are several lawsuits. I find it astonishing that so many of these stories mention no RSVPs. Would it not be clearly requested in the invitations? Especially for a catered event like a wedding. Well, I see a few others have told some awful tales, so I'll add mine. My first job at 15 was a banquet server. We had weddings most every weekend, so I've seen quite a few. The most memorable was a wedding between two firefighters that met on the job. Seemed like a normal wedding until just after the father-daughter dance. The bride's father collapsed. The staff went running into the ballroom because of the noise. Immediately, on-call EMTs that were in attendance were giving CPR and other life-saving measures. I distinctly remember a massive needle being put into the man. He was dead on the spot, but they waited until he was out of the venue to call the death. For obvious reasons, loudly crying. It was truly awful and the grandkids were hysterical. The bride was a total wreck. Everyone left shortly after. Even the staff were upset and had a hard time finishing work that day. It was truly terrible. I felt awful for the family and especially the bride. A few years ago, my cousin was getting married. The man she was marrying was perfect for her. I was jealous. I wanted something like they had. Anyway, the day of the wedding comes and her maid of honor, sister, and her soon-to-be husband are nowhere to be found. Well, she's waiting in the church and one of the groomsmen comes in with a handwritten letter. Edit. From the fiancé. Turns out the maid of honor, her sister, and her fiancé have been sleeping together for a while. She's pregnant, and they've ran off to Vegas to get married. So, no wedding. The bride was dead set on wearing not one but 2 designer gowns. To finance all of that, there was no heating at the lovely February wedding. They also provided only food and cake for a third of the guests. The food itself was 2 small patties, white sauce, about 100 gr, 3 ounces of cooked chicken, but she did love both her dresses. I wasn't technically in attendance, and this is definitely not as botched as some of these other stories in the comments. But I used to have a friend who owned a small hotel which operated primarily as a wedding venue. They lived in one of the hotel rooms, so all of the events taking place in the courtyard directly outside their door could be heard very clearly. We were hanging out one night during a wedding and listening to the speeches. the most notable of which was the best man speech, during which he told the story of having a threesome with both the bride and groom at Burning Man, and heavily alluded to still being in love with the groom. Lots of older relatives in attendance. The place went silent and the wedding ended about 2 hours early. I worked at a wedding where the couple had sent out 100 invitations without RSVP. They had no clue how many people would show up, but they did tell the venue to prepare dinner for 150 guests. 35 people showed up. 25 kilos of prepared salmon fillet got thrown out. The party ended fairly early because the few guests that were there started leaving around 9:30. We were home early. My wife and I watched in horror as the wedding planner proceeded to get very sloppily drunk and exceedingly outlandish behavior. It came crashing to an end when she started dancing, grinding on the father of the bride with his wife and the bride a few feet away staring in shock. Lots of shouting, and then the groomsmen not so kindly escorted her out. I was the photographer. The bride was very close to her stepfather, and her father had not been in the picture for a lot of her life. But he was invited to the wedding and they did 2 father-daughter dances, so he wasn't left out or anything. He was also supposed to pay for part of the photos, and he just showed up with no money. He eventually got mad, like she was doing something wrong by including the stepdad, who raised her and paid for most of the wedding. And for that matter, her upbringing. She spent like an hour crying in the back, and eventually an uncle offered to pay for some of what the dad owed. I knocked off $100 and stayed an extra hour for free so we could get all the photos we would have done during that hour. But it was obviously not the same for her. Then the dad spent weeks harassing me to send him the photos I took because she wouldn't send them to him. I didn't, obviously. We went to a wedding that they just chose a spot they liked to have the wedding. It was someone's front porch that had a river. Set up the chairs and the water level rose and the chairs had to be moved. Halfway through the ceremony, the person who owned the house opened the front door. They were literally doing the ceremony on the front door. The door basically hit them and asked what was going on. They explained it to him and luckily he was cool with it, but told them to be respectful because his wife was breastfeeding inside. To add, when the guy came out, we hustled through the event and sent the groom and bride away while we packed up fast as we were. The police came but didn't give us a hard time because we were already leaving. There were snakes chilling by the edge of the river too, which was cool. IDK if I'd call it botched, per se, because it was elegant and fun for the majority of it. But I attended a wedding where they held the ceremony and reception at this renovated historic house. During the reception though, police were called because apparently the venue wasn't actually permitted to be a business. It was just some people's house that they kept renting out to weddings, to the immense annoyance of their neighbors, and subsequently the police. One of the house owners actually ended up being arrested because they had already been given a last warning at the previous wedding the weekend before, and the dude was getting belligerent. Most of the reception was done by that point anyway, but it sure was chaotic as we were all shooed out, trying to call like 50 Ubers while the cops made sure we left. I have a low-stakes one where no one died. Unlike some of the horrors in this thread, the bride was almost an hour late coming out to her own wedding. It was 40+ degrees Celsius and the wedding was outside. After the bridesmaids walked down the aisle, it started raining lightly. The bride wouldn't come out, so we all relocated to the rain venue, which wasn't prepared, so we all stood and some people were in the aisle and had to squish out of the way when the bride came down. None of that would have happened if she'd been on time because the weather was sunny and clear up to that point. Then, during the ceremony, after the groom read his vows, he ripped up his bride's vows. She has some learning disabilities and sort of sputtered through what she had wanted to say. It was hard to understand and I felt so bad for her. The lights came up after dinner and the groom said, "We're not dancing people, so just mingle," and everyone left. Not really the wedding itself per se, but the bride and groom hired a driver and a bus to transport the entire wedding party and a few guests from the wedding venue back to the hotel after the reception. Turns out the driver sat outside in the bus drinking beers the entire time the wedding was going on, and then was too drunk to drive everyone to the hotel. We all had to take turns hiring the same Uber driver to take us back and forth because the wedding was in the middle of nowhere and there was only one Uber driver available. Wedding reception ended at midnight and some guests didn't make it back to the hotel until 6 a.m.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.